Welcome back to the Beyond Condition podcast, where today I'm going to be sharing my story as a bodybuilder, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about my life before bodybuilding and how I do really feel that that's contributed to my experience as a bodybuilder. There's so much that can come from this journey, and it's a really nice opportunity for me to share both the positives and negatives that I've been through, the challenges I've faced. And I hope that, if it does resonate with you and there's things that you can pick up from this episode, that it does help your journey. And, I am a competitor, but I do feel that anyone on the journey of physique development could take home some useful things from this episode. And my intention is to be open and honest throughout. And I really do hope you enjoy this episode. So right now I'm just over a week post show from the FitX finals, and actually doing this episode is almost that quite cathartic feeling. It's always a strange space when you enter this post show period, and even though I've visited it so many times, it's never easy. It's always a different feeling post show. The more shows you do, the different feelings you have. Also, it's very largely dependent on where your placing is from the show, how your prep's been, what your plans are after the show. And that all contributes to how you feel and how you process, going into a reverse or going into an off season, or whether you've competed and you don't want to compete again. There's a lot of things to think about, and it can be a really strange space. But I must say, this time round, it's definitely the first time that I've personally felt that actually I'm really content with how this season has gone in regards to placings and, prep in itself. And this is probably the first time I've felt completely at one with that feeling, as it were, and regaining that control, regaining, how I feel about food, how I feel about training, all of those things that off the back of a prep, training does become hard. You train because you need to. And sometimes I can find that the enjoyment isn't there as much as in off season or at the start of a prep, because of course your body weight is going down. You're in a deficit. I went into quite a severe deficit towards the end. And ultimately that means, your energies are going to be placed in certain areas of life. You train because you need to train. You do your steps, your food prep, you eat, you do all the things that contribute to having a successful prep. And it's more like getting through each day when you are in that severe deficit. And then I always find that sort of, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks after a show, when your calories are coming up, you're feeling better, health is getting back on track, that you think, blimey, I really did feel like shit at points of that prep. And I think, if you have done a prep or any type of diet, you can relate to, those feelings of you just become very tunnel visioned, and how you feel, you just put that to the back of your mind sometimes. And, there's that end goal of whether you're going to compete, do a photo shoot, go on holiday, whatever it may be that you're focusing on, you've got that goal in mind. And normally that's associated with a date. So there's almost no room to be able to dwell on how you feel at points of prep when it does get hard. I find for myself that I take enjoyment from how hard prep can get. The tendencies of that sort of neuroticism that you get into can be something that just keeps you going. It's like, well, I'm getting closer, I'm losing weight, my body composition is changing, and everything's going in my favor. All I've got to do is keep going. So, that's not to say that you have to feel like shit when you do a prep, but, I really do believe from myself, people that I've spoken to, lots of people that have prepped, that there is going to be elements of feeling pretty battered in a prep. And I would say it's quite normal to feel like that when you do get to stage condition, because it's not a normal, body weight to be holding. So of course you're going to get elements of fatigue. You're going to feel that deficit kicking in. So, it is when you get to that point of competition or whatever your goal is, it is then hard to have that goal removed and accept, food coming back in, not doing as much, say, cardio, the things that contribute to a prep when you're in that deficit. And it's that transition of, should I be eating more food? Am I allowed to eat more food? How is this sitting with me? And that is personally what I felt post-show most of my competitive career, that I have those elements of wanting to eat, but then I have those elements of finding it hard to come away from being stage condition. And this is something we've spoken about on the pod quite a lot. The main focus post-show is to regain health, and you're not going to do that by clinging on to being stage condition for elongated periods of time. So it is hard, but there is a purpose, and that's where having a coach and having someone to support you doing that is super, super important, because regaining your health and your quality of life is massive. But again, that tunnel vision that we've had for so long, it could be 6 months or more, stepping away from that, having the goal removed, those combination of things, and also having elements of freedom, depending on how your reverse out is, it is a very strange place. And, the ghrelin effect that kicks in, the hunger signaling is off, the hormones can often be in the gutter. There's a lot to cope with. And especially with first timers listening, it is a mind warp. It's crazy. I remember right back, when I did my first prep after the show, it was such a weird space. I got down really, really low body fat. I've spoken about this on posts on Instagram and spoken to people about this, because I didn't have any training background. And when I first went into a prep, I haven't really done any weight training. It had just been very novel stuff. I then got down to a really dieted phase. And when I competed, I was pretty much skin and bones, there was no muscle there. And then I was able to transition into an off season and start to look at gaining muscle. But after that first show, when my coach Stephen said, go and have a nice meal and enjoy a bit of time with the friends and family that have been on this journey with you, they've supported you, they've seen you go through prep, they've seen you compete, and it's important to nourish that. I ended up going completely in the opposite direction to what I guess I thought I would, because I wasn't armed with what that would feel like, how hungry I would feel, how satiation just wasn't satisfied for so long. And when I went for the meal after the show, I just ordered so many different things and ended up feeling really, really uncomfortable, really regretful, not good in myself, processing those foods digestive wise, and, being able to process the thoughts that come alongside that. Eating so much more food when I'd been in a deficit for so long was crazy. My body didn't react well. My stomach went really big. I wasn't able to digest the food quickly. I felt tired, but also almost hypo. And it was really, really crazy. And I actually had a very similar experience for the season after that as well. To get a handle on post-show is really, really tough. And I find myself, with experience, I've been able to understand it more and process it before I go into that phase. So when I'm, close to show, when I know my season is going to be finishing, I start to think about what's going to happen after the show, what my plans are. I start to process that beforehand and just get myself ready within my own mind of what I want to do after the show, what's going to be important to me. But I guess the messages here that we've spoken about again on the pod before, sometimes you almost have to visit these places to learn and understand how to move forward as a competitor. If your intention is to compete multiple times, and this is something that you're going to need to face multiple times, then you can learn from this period of time. But it's trying not to feel, super, super hard on yourself and not being kind to yourself. If you do, muck up, as it were, if you do overeat, if your food behaviors are difficult. You know, if people around you don't understand, that's a very common thing. I've faced that as well. You know, trying to be open and honest with the people around me has been a super important part to my journey, because ultimately, you know, when you prep and people around you haven't seen someone do that before, after the show, the immediate thing is they want to gift you food, they want to take you for a meal. All of these social occasions come up that haven't been there throughout a prep. And then it's this mind warp of, I don't know what to do. I can't say no to food. And you're hungry, of course, you know, you've dieted for quite some time. So there's lots of lessons to be learned in this time. And again, like I said earlier, you know, having a coach during this time, speaking to people, being open about how you feel can really, really help that period of time. And also just learning those lessons and giving yourself a break. You know, after a show, it's nice to be able to go for a meal, celebrate. You know, no matter what your placing is, you've completed a prep, you have stood on stage, you've held your head high, and you've been able to complete that journey to the stage. You've got up on that stage. If you're a first timer, it's something you've probably never done anything like that before. And it's a massive achievement. And I think that sometimes, you know, after the show, if things don't go as you thought they would, it can sometimes take away from what you've actually achieved. And, you know, you get those associations of feeling bad, feeling negative about yourself. But it is trying to just get back on track as soon as you can when the time is right for you. You know, having a bit of downtime, but then regaining control, getting back on a plan, regaining your focus. And that ties in nicely with, you know, where I'm currently at and reflections on how this prep has actually been the hardest prep that I've done. So I've been competing for around 9 years now. And like I mentioned at the start, you know, processing this season and feeling the best I have, I would say is largely down to knowing that I've prepped within my capability to the best that I possibly could, and planning my post-show period, getting my head in the game after the show, enjoying some foods, but then getting back on track has really, really helped me to regain that control post-show. And that's something that I would recommend as much as possible. You know, getting it in your own mind what you want to do post-show, and if you slightly deviate from that, bringing it back in and being able to regain that focus as soon as possible is super, super important. So with regards to this prep, and the reason I say it's the hardest prep I've done, I would say that the main contributor is getting my weight down to the lowest it's been. The first time I got to the weight I got to in this prep was that first prep right at the start. So bearing in mind, right at the start, I didn't have hardly any muscle mass. Like I say, I hadn't trained. So, you know, it was pretty much skin and bone. And I was the same body weight or around that when I stepped on stage for the finals. So if you think, you know, 9 years worth of off seasons, muscle growth, also going down the assisted route, you know, I'm carrying a lot more muscle than I was back then. And to get to the same body weight gives you an idea as to what, like, how that would feel, how that would look. You know, it's crazy. Like, I never thought I'd see that body weight again. And I guess for me, bringing condition and getting down that low was again a very cathartic process. You know, I didn't know that that would be possible. I didn't ever imagine that I would delve into getting my body weight that low. And consequently, that made the prep hard. You know, getting to those low body fat levels, it was tough. For 11 weeks at the tail end of that prep, you know, I was running 1,000 calories a day, and it became very institutionalized. It was laser focus, you know, to get through each day. There was tactics within that to be able to cope with the hunger, to be able to train, do my steps, all of the things that contribute to a prep. And I now look back and I think, I don't even know how I survived that long with that low calorie, and how much expenditure was going in and how much was contributing to that. And it's crazy, you know, that tunnel vision that does come in, how you just switch to, this is what I need to do because I've got a competition coming up. And if you've listened to the pod before, you'll know that, you know, throughout this prep, I've been open and honest about going down the assisted route. And that's a different ball game in itself. It's been a very different prep alongside it being the hardest. And I also went into doing IFBB, which is something very new to me, you know, competing with two bros. And the aspiration there was to, you know, level up, try a different federation, look at where that would take me as an athlete. And that also brought a different pressure, you know, different posing, a different way to look at competing, I guess. And I always remember thinking, you know, I don't know if I'd ever do two bros because it almost felt quite elite. And no matter what accolades I've had in the past, it's still a very humbling experience for me. It's still something that I'm very grateful for. I've always felt, I guess, the opportunity to do this as a choice, as a sport, is something to be really grateful for. And leveling up and going into different federations, you know, bringing my body fat levels down lower than they've been before with this much muscle was a crazy journey. And it, now I sit here and I process that and I think what went into the prep, it's being crazy. But I'm also so thankful for that opportunity to see where I could take my physique. And I think that's something that's super important when you look at physique development, is you beating yourself. If you're going to compete, if you can compete, do an off season and work on where you need to improve, and then you compete again. And if your physique is improved, then I think that that should be the main focus for us as competitors. This journey is for you. And I think sometimes if you don't do it for the right reasons, that can contribute again to how you feel post show, how you feel in a prep, because this is a choice and no one has to compete, no one has to bodybuild. But if you're doing it for your own development and how you feel about yourself, if you want to continue improving your physique, then that is the right reason. You're able to gain so much from this journey. But it's when you look at external pressures and striving for things that are, you know, maybe not appropriate for where you're at or what other people think that you should achieve, it then really does muddy the waters as to you being able to notice what you've achieved on this journey of physique development. And I guess for me, being a bodybuilder and my life before that does contribute to that feeling of, you know, remaining humble and being grateful for this opportunity, because life is hard for many of us. It's not plain sailing. Things happen. We have to face challenges, and there's a lot of things that are thrown at us in life. You know, you never know what's going to happen from one day to the next. My childhood, my early adulthood, that did contribute to how I feel about bodybuilding, because it hasn't been easy, you know, and there's a lot of things that I'll talk about today that will funnel into remaining in that space, using the opportunity to develop my physique as an opportunity to grow and enjoy that process. And that's something I spoke about on the pod with Georgia and Matt when they were on, you know, embracing and enjoying all areas of bodybuilding, whether you're in a growth phase, whether you're in a prep, whether you're in a maintenance phase, whatever that may be. There's enjoyment that can come from all of those phases, but it's often lost when you're in that pursuit of, you know, continually getting better, improving your physique. And if you can step back, reflect on your achievements and continue on your path as a bodybuilder, knowing that you're doing your best, it's super, super important. That's going to contribute overly to how you feel you're getting on during this time. So if we rewind it right back to where it all began, for me, bodybuilding, I used to feel like it saved me. It was the first thing that I found that I could be good at. During my school years, when I went into working and early adulthood, I was always okay at everything. I don't feel like I was able to excel at anything. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but I always had this sort of internal, I don't know how I describe it, but I knew that I could be good at something. I just didn't know what it was. And through my childhood and coming into being a young adult and working and trying to figure out where my path was leading me, there was a lot of things that I went through that could have easily thrown me off. But that nagging feeling that I had inside that I could be good at something was always there. And I do believe that that carried me through the tougher times during life. When things really did get tough, that feeling was able to ride me through. And that's still, for me, that's why I say I thought that bodybuilding saved me, because it was finally something that I could control. The food, the training, what I put in would be a direct representation of, what happened with my physique, how well I could do in the sport. And that was all controlled by me. And that's something that I lacked through childhood. Being part of a family where my mum was a single mum, that was hard in itself to see my mum struggle to be able to, in essence, put food on the table, to be able to provide for me and my brother to the best she could, to give us nice things in life, to be able to, get us a new pair of trainers, or even be able to pay for us to go on school trips, things like that. And there was points during my childhood where mum had 8 jobs. She always remember she'd do an ironing job, and me and my brother would sit in the back seats, and there'd be ironing hung up across the whole of the back of the car, and we'd be in between the clothes, and she'd be dropping ironing off to different people, and then she'd be going off to a cleaning job, and then various other jobs, just to keep money coming in for us to have the basics. And I do believe, seeing that work ethic and seeing what my mum did to be able to provide for us, in essence, is where my, I guess, humbleness from being able to commit to bodybuilding comes from. And that was right back at the start. This was from a really young age. From when I was 5, my dad left, and it was just me, my mum, and my brother, and my granddad helped out. And, it was, when I think back, it was beans on toast, or beans and jacket potato, or maybe like turkey dinosaurs, chips and beans, very basic foods. And that actually also contributed to my relationship with food, and how my palate was very limited before bodybuilding and being able to explore different foods. And I actually, as a child, I decided to become vegetarian, and that was purely from wanting to being a teenager and wanting to annoy my mum. I decided on Christmas Day that I was a vegetarian, because of course Christmas Day is normally, meat, veggies, and all the additional stuff. And I was just being a typical teenager and decided, right, I'm a vegetarian. So this ultimately led to my palate being even more limited. So I was then vegetarian for a long time, 13 years, I believe. And it was to come into bodybuilding and to change my preferences, my palate, and be able to hit things like a protein target. That was what, I guess, sort of forced the transition into eating meat again. And now I think, how did I not eat meat? But it's also given me experience with being able to, work with people that are vegetarian, vegan. I can relate to that. Having that as a lifestyle choice is absolutely fine if that works for you. But for me, it was, it went from having a limited palate to even more of a limited palate, because it was almost like, as a child, food wasn't really a focus for me. It was never something that I was that interested in. That also went over into my sort of adult years as well. It was never really a concern of mine. So bodybuilding obviously changed that for me. And something I'll speak about today is, disordered eating, self-restriction, that type of stuff that I have faced on my journey as a bodybuilder. And when I look back, I find it really interesting. And I also take those lessons from those periods of time and use them for where I'm currently at. So like I say, as a child, it wasn't easy. It was tough to see mum going through that, to be able to provide for us, and to be able to, like I say, put food on the table. And then as I grew up, the normal teenage hormones and that period of around 14 where I just didn't know really who I was. I didn't know how to find out who I was. And, just before approaching that time, I got bullied a lot at school. There was lots of instances where, as bullying does go, it's often very personal. There is periods of time where, I'd eat my lunch in a toilet cubicle at school because I was so scared to go outside at break times because of the bullies and, the threats that they'd given me. And when I think about those times, again, what bullying is, it's often that you've never, or you haven't done anything to actually deserve that, or for that to be put on you. It's often just that sort of playground mentality. And if a bully's going to pick on someone, it might be you that they pick. So I never actually did anything wrong during that time, but I think that I was probably a weaker individual to be able to get targeted from, being bullied. And it, again, was a very hard time then, approaching that sort of age of 14, thinking I don't know who I am. And when the personal attacks of being bullied, being told I'm goofy and whatever else, those things continue to ring in your head, grading of yourself, because you don't know who you are a lot of the time at that age. And it is tough. And consequently, when I was around 14, progressing through the years at school, I went down the wrong path. I ended up dating a guy that was a little bit older than me, and he was, I guess, what you'd visualize at school as like one of the ones that you wouldn't mess with, that like sort of bad boy type identity. And I think that I didn't really know myself. I wanted to be liked. I didn't want to be bullied anymore. And that facilitated a level of acceptance and hierarchy, I guess. And that then led to quite a volatile relationship. Being just 14, it is, you're not grown up. You're at a point in life where I think sometimes you think you know best. I always remember when adults would say, trust me, I know, I've been at that age. And you automatically think, no, 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 I know best. I'm, old enough to make my own decisions. I'm a teenager now. But that is true. When you look back, you think maybe they did know best. But this relationship, it did become abusive at times, quite a lot down the more of the mental abuse. And there was a lot of violence associated with that relationship and going down the wrong path. For me, there was periods of time when my self-esteem was very, very low, and it was really tough time. And during that time, I did smoke a lot of weed, and it was it got to the point where I was old enough to go to college, so this had been a few years, and I couldn't actually go out the house without having a little bit of a joint, because I felt like I wasn't able to face the world without that. And again, this is something that I haven't spoken about before, and it is, I guess, sometimes a grey area, because you don't know how this will be received, but it was something that I feel is important, that comes across as part of my journey, to hit that point of such a low point of being dependent on something and being able to come back from that, and then find bodybuilding later on down the line and be so grateful for that opportunity, is something that I feel is so important to get across. Sometimes from a outside point of view, I think when you've been successful in something like bodybuilding, a lot of people think that you've just lifted the weights, done the food, and it's happened. But that isn't often the case with a lot of people that compete and a lot of people that commit to this journey. It's a journey of self-evolution, and that's, like I say, why I think it's important to share this journey before bodybuilding and how it hasn't been easy before, and actually this can be a great opportunity for anyone. And coming away from that, I know I've got that addictive personality nature within me, and that was facilitated through that period of time by leaning on smoking weed. And then after that, when I came away from that relationship, that first relationship I had, I then went into my early, well, sort of 18 onwards to my early 20s, where I drank a lot and I'd go out at weekends. And I think back and I think it's just mental, because it would be drink as much as you can, of as many different drinks as you can, and just drinking to escape, I guess. Again, this is probably something that can be fairly common within people, not really knowing where your identity is at still, and then finding that escape through alcohol or drugs or whatever it may be. It's very easy to switch off and put that to the back of your mind and think, well, I'm living for the moment. And it's so common to find something as your crutch. And that's what bodybuilding did for me at the start, being able to funnel that addictive personality, that want to be good at something, into something that felt positive. And personally, it has given me a lot, but it has been a challenge at times. And I think that, when I reflect and look back at childhood and what contributed before bodybuilding, it is definitely a, like I say, at the start, a cathartic process of knowing how far I've come and not forgetting that as I, go through this journey as a bodybuilder. And when I was when I was 14, I did have a period of time where, during this sort of, I guess, self-exploration stage and not really knowing where I was fitting, and being in this relationship that was, I guess, I was striving for that hierarchy. I ran away from home for a period of time, and I was away from home for 6 weeks, and I was actually a missing person when I was 14. And another contributor to, when prep feels hard, when bodybuilding feels hard, I always think back to that period of time. And for me, that's what hard was. I left my house with no shoes on, and I had a top and some trousers on, and that's all I had. I had nothing, and I had to survive myself. The boyfriend I was with, his family didn't want me in the house because the police were looking for me. I didn't really have any friends, and I had to then sort of get to know people, befriend people, to be able to hopefully, have somewhere to stay. But there was nights where I'd walk on the streets on my own for hours on end with nowhere to stay. So when I think about that in relation to actually being at a point in my life where I have a shelter, I have food, I have opportunities. It's never going to get as bad as that. And that's something that's super, super important to me, to remain in that space of gratitude for the bodybuilding lifestyle and what I can currently put into that. And when I went into bodybuilding, from that early adulthood stage, previous to that, I was into triathlon and I competed in triathlon. It was an enjoyable sport. It was my first opportunity to try a sport, because as a teenager, as a child, sport was never really on the radar for me. It wasn't something that I was infused by. I wasn't that interested in being part of a sport. I did, however, like rounders, but that was more for the fun element. And when I did triathlon, I really got into it. It gave me a lot of discipline. It gave me understanding into basic nutrition, being able to push myself, being able to deal with fatigue, lots of hours. It was up to 15 to 20 hours a week training, because I got up to half Ironman distance, and it was a lot. And that was something that was really insightful for me, to be able to, I guess, understand that I could be disciplined, and that I had this inner focus that I didn't realize I had. Unfortunately, through triathlon and a car accident when I was younger, it got to the point where the back injury that I had from the car accident ended up being aggravated by, I think, from what I could feel, mainly from the running of triathlon, especially going up to half Ironman. I was running, longer than half marathons, and it's a lot. And I remember times, so vividly, where I'd wake up, because most days I'd be training twice a day. I'd wake up and I'd literally roll myself to the side of the bed to get out of the bed. And then even just standing on my feet, the pressure that went into my back was so immensely painful. But for some reason, I would still then go out and run 10 miles or whatever it may be. I guess telling myself that I didn't want to give up and I didn't want to give in to the pain. And that can be positive in some respects, that attitude in regards to disciplining yourself, and also being able to tolerate a lot of training and how hard that is on the body and also mentally. But I did have to make the decision that I would need to transition into something else, because my back was really, really getting to the point where it was very painful. I was having a lot of treatment and I just knew that I needed to change what I was doing. So I actually went to a show to watch a bodybuilding show, and I remember looking up at the stage again so vividly and seeing all of these people tanned, in really good shape, and thinking, wow, I could never do something like that. And a friend of mine, Jules, was there, and he said to me, you'll be up there next year. And I was like, fuck off. He was like, you could do that. And I literally was like, there's no way I could get in shape like that. And the seed was sown then. I trained the next day, just a normal gym workout. And I was at this point in triathlon where it wasn't serving me well. And I started training. I thought, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could try bodybuilding. And I was on the seated leg press at the time, and I thought, I'm going to do this. So I looked for a coach. I started to look at different plans, different diets, and I didn't really know anything about nutrition and training. My friend helped me get together a diet, started doing some different training, and during this time was looking at coaching. And I came across Stephen, who was my coach for around 7 years, and our journey together was phenomenal. It's a long time to be coached by someone. Weekly check-ins, weekly chats. But until we stopped coaching together, there was no reason for me to not have him as a coach, because ultimately, if you can stay with a coach for a long period of time, they get to know your body, how you respond, they can make your training bespoke to you. It's a really positive thing if you can build that relationship and maintain it. And it really did serve me well having the same coach, because he knew how I worked, and we had a really great relationship, and we became friends off the back of that as well. And he was the one I started with. And I remember the first consult call we had, and I was like, I've done really well. I haven't eaten chocolate for 6 weeks. I haven't had anything that would be, considered not a clean food, as it were. And he was like, tell me, why do you think you've done well by not eating chocolate for 6 weeks? And I was like, well, I can be disciplined. I don't need it. And it was really funny because he was like, okay. And over our time together, for me, especially for the first probably 4 years, self-restriction and disordered eating was something that I struggled with, especially off the back of a show. And throughout my whole time of being coached, even with Tom now, if my coach says to me, let's drop the macros, I'll say, should we drop them even more? Because I'm not scared of doing that. I want to push, I want to feel prep, and I want, I guess, my coach to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get to stage condition. But again, that can be a negative trait in some respects, because when you come off the back of a show in particular, trying to self-restrict and, keep doing large amounts of cardio and keep calories down and keep trying to hang on to stage condition, for me, that was something that happened a lot. After a show, I wouldn't be able to let it go. I wouldn't be able to get my eating back on track. And that then led to seasons where I would prep and I weigh everything, you know, even so I flexible diet, and even if I went over by a gram of a green bean, I would chop a green bean in half if I needed to, because I want it to be exact. And that's, for me, part of the privilege of prepping is that I want to make sure it is exact. And for me, that's what sits well. I actually find that being more disciplined suits my personality better than having maybe more of an open approach. But it's being careful with, now I can talk about it, I can see it. But at the time, finding bodybuilding and gaining strength and identity through that then led me down to the path of over controlling. And through a lot of the 7 years with Stephen, it was actually him trying to empower me to be able to make decisions, like in off season, being able to go for a meal with family and things like this. That's something that completely threw me off at first. It wasn't something I was able to accept easily. Another example of when this got, I guess, to territory where it was out of hand, I went on a spa day, and I remember it so well. I hadn't planned to have an off-plan meal, but I was in off season, and something that Stephen tried to empower me to do was once or twice a week, mainly at weekends, I would have off plan. I would track through the week. I was in a surplus, so that was fine. And then I would have a meal at weekends and eat light around that, and then maybe have, baked good or something. And we'd gone to this spa day, and it was the option to do that, but I hadn't told myself in my mind that I was going to do that. And then we got to the spa and a meal was included. So it was like, okay, so we'll go for a meal. And I ended up having pasta and tomato sauce, and there was a bit of cheese on it. That was all I had. Went in the sauna after and just broke down into tears, and I couldn't understand why I'd let myself have a meal off plan. I couldn't process that I'd had food that I hadn't planned ahead that I was going to be having, and it completely threw me off. And I ended up going up to the hotel room to speak to Stephen on the phone. I just said to him, can I call you? And I talked him through what had happened. So I said, I wasn't planning to have this off-plan meal, but it was included, and I told him what I'd had. And he said, so what's the problem here? I said, well, I had a meal and I don't know what calories were in it. I don't know the amounts of the food. What am I going to do? I've ruined everything. And I was literally in tears. And he said, so let's break it down. You've had tomato sauce, pasta, and a little bit of cheese on top. This is not something that's going to be detrimental to you. This is something that is, normal foods. You haven't gone over the top. You haven't gone off track. It's absolutely fine. And it was him speaking to me as that sort of outside person, but someone I knew well and trusted, that I was able to digest it and realize that actually I was okay and I was able to get back on track, let it go and move forward. But let me tell you, that lasted for days, going through that in my mind. Should I have done it? Shouldn't I have done it? Being able to process that I'd gone off plan without knowing well ahead that I was going to do that was really hard. And there's so many moments like that I have struggled with after a show, being able to embrace different foods and being able to allow myself to have off-plan meals. That was really, really hard for me. It's not something that came naturally. I always felt an element of guilt, and I also felt a bit of imposter syndrome in regards to not being a bodybuilder if I was having something I didn't track. Because I literally tracked everything, like I say, cutting a green bean in half. That was very normal for me. Track the milk in my teas, all of my supplements, everything to the letter, even spices, herbs. Again, that was something that Stephen didn't know I was tracking. And he said, when I said to him, oh, I've tracked, I think it was some cinnamon in a bit of Greek yogurt. And he was like, what do you mean you tracked cinnamon? I just felt that every single thing that I consumed needed to be put in my fitness pal. Otherwise, I wasn't a real bodybuilder. Going back to that, not knowing who I am, in order to be a real bodybuilder, I felt that I had to do everything to the letter. And there is an element of truth in that. But it's also verging on, over restricting and that disordered eating pattern, not being able to sit in a restaurant and order a meal to be able to enjoy during an off season isn't what I'd say is normal behavior, because I'd institutionalized myself so much. And I also, before placing and winning a show, I felt that I couldn't call myself a competitor because I hadn't done well enough. For me, doing a prep and getting on stage wasn't enough to call myself a competitor. And there were so many conversations when people said, oh, you're a bodybuilder and you compete, and I'd swerve it because I didn't want to say that I competed, because I guess ultimately I didn't want to tell anyone that hadn't won a show or that hadn't placed. And that was definitely a self-detrimental thing, a self-confidence thing, all of the above. I never felt good enough to be able to call myself a bodybuilder. And that is something I think that is a big message for a lot of people. If you bodybuild for yourself and what you've achieved from this journey, don't let that be taken away by placings and accolades, because you're doing things on the daily to evolve and take control of your life. And it's so important to remember that. And I think that, that then going across into other areas of your life is again something that's very common. Prepping and being so focused for 6, 8, 10 months, however long your prep is, it's a long time to contribute of your life to this goal of stepping on stage or whatever your goal is. And then going into off season and being able to transition, being able to enjoy different foods and regaining your relationship with food is a really important part of the process. But it is hard. It's very hard. It's almost like in the past, I'd have my post-show meal and whatever that may be. But I think probably in the earlier stages, I maybe did that wrong in regards to, I would see the night of the show as my only opportunity to eat. I would then eat so much that I'd feel pretty ill, if I'm honest. And then I'd feel like going back to tracking the next day was a hardship. And then I'd feel that hadn't done it right. I felt, really ill the next day. And then going back to tracking, it was back into that institutionalized behavior, because tracking for me it has got to points where it is neurotic. It is, in the past, it is a stress almost. Now I'm fortunate enough to be at that point where in a prep, I track to the letter because I enjoy that. And I wouldn't ever want to step on stage and think, could I have done more? And that's just how I work. But I am able to, you know, in off season, in maintenance, wherever that may be, I'm able to do things like go on holiday and be able to eyeball foods and know that I'm keeping my protein up, I'm having a good amount of carbohydrates and some good fats in there. I can also enjoy something like baked goods after a show and not feel guilt from that. I've said on the pod before, choose foods that you can't track, choose foods that are away from the norm that you'd really enjoy. It's something very different for your palate, something that you can go, okay, this is a really nice thing I can take enjoyment from. And it's not, I guess it's trying to stay away from that having excess foods, because it's very easy to do after a show, but more thinking of it as an experience and enjoying that. Food is there to be enjoyed. And I think when we're bodybuilding, you know, especially at the tail end of a prep, you're never going to be fully satiated. So to then have satiation from something like a baked good, it feels very strange. It feels very nice. And it can go one of two ways. You can regret it or you can enjoy it. Or I guess a third way would be that can then lead on to having a lot more of that type of food. And it's trying to nip that in the bud. And if you can enjoy something that you're really going to look forward to, and it be something that's bespoke for you or whatever that may be, and it can be from an approach of, I want to enjoy this bit of food. I've worked hard in a diet. I'm going to have something nice to eat, or, you know, going for a meal with family. That doesn't need to be a negative thing. And it also doesn't necessarily mean I deserve this. It's more like I want to have a nice meal. I want to have a baked good, and trying to take that, I guess, mindset with it, rather than this either shouldn't have that or having it and then having a shitload more and then finding yourself in this really difficult position to regain control. Because like I said right at the start, you know, your hormones, the ghrelin effect, all of those things that happen after a show, it's crazy. So thinking ahead before you compete, planning your post show, working with your coach or people around you is something that is key to being able to stay on track after your show. But this is a very individual response, and this is what I've learned from working with people. Some people really need monitoring, other people feel more comfortable. More so if you've competed multiple times, it does become a little bit easier, the edge is off, because you've experienced it before. But let me tell you, you know, I've visited post show a lot of times now, and you always feel something. There's always a reflection, and it's never an easy space. So just know, if you are going through this period of time, which is, you know, it's a time of year where people are coming out of their competitive season, it's very normal to have a real mix of feelings and thoughts. And it's important to process those thoughts. And if you can talk to someone around you, you can then get it out in the open. You can get it off your chest. If you can talk to someone that knows about bodybuilding, that knows about competing, that's going to be a massive help as well. Competing in itself is a mind warp. You're being judged, fully exposed by a panel of judges that don't know you, you don't know them, and they're just looking at your physiques and who fits the criteria best. And that's what I've, you know, big lesson I've learned through my journey as a competitor is that if I've nailed my prep, things like if I've done my posing practice, if I've hit my macros, if I've done every training session, and I arrive on that stage feeling the best version of myself, that's all I can do. I can't do any more than that. And if you're not what the judges are looking for, that doesn't have to be detrimental to you. Of course, we go into competition to win, but I feel so fulfilled from this season because I brought the best condition I've ever brought to stage. Yes, I didn't win this season, and yeah, again, you know, I'd like to win. I'd like to lift a trophy again on that podium finish, but what I'm learning is that bodybuilding is to be enjoyed, and it's for my own evolution. If I can look at my save shots and know that I look better than the last time I competed, that for me is what has enabled me to feel so much better during this post-show period. And I speak about posing practice, again, something so important with competing. It's something that, you know, some people do neglect, and it's super, super important to, that is arguably more important than some of the other elements of bodybuilding. If you're going to compete in a physique-based sport and you haven't practiced your posing, how are you going to exhibit your best physique? It's super, super important. And getting that practice in, using a posing coach, it's another variable that's going to help your success as a competitor. And it's something that shouldn't be neglected. Stepping on stage knowing that you've done the practice that your coach has set you, that you've looked at posing coaches, that you've taken lessons and critique and being able to work on that, practice it, regiment it. It's another string to your bow of what you've achieved during a prep. Being able to exhibit your best physique is super, super important. And when my first 2 seasons I competed, and I was up against sort of 30, 35 plus girls, and I didn't feel like the judges even looked at me, and it was very hard. I didn't know if this was the thing I was going to be good at. I felt like I could be, but I also felt like, why aren't I doing very well? And then there was that resilience and that inner, like I spoke about, that sort of inner niggle that was just keep going. And of course, working with Stephen helped that. And then in my 3rd season, I came 6th and I got my 1st place in. And that for me was massive. It was a massive, massive turning point. And then from then, I went into 2019 for my season there. And the first time I won a show, which was a UK UP show, I broke down on the stage. I hit the floor, and that was, I guess, the first time in my life that I felt fully accepted. I felt that suddenly I was, I don't know, worth being on this earth. And all of those years and years before that first time I won a show, all flooded through, all the memories of being on the leg extension the day after a show, crying because I didn't feel like I was good enough. All the times when I've been through post-show and eaten too much and then locked myself in a toilet and not wanted to come out and not speak to anyone. All of those training sessions where I felt like legitimately, the fatigue and how hard it was, I didn't know if I could continue. It all flooded through my body, and I looked into the audience and saw my mum and just broke down, because it was that recognition that I strive for, tracking every single day, every single gram, even in off season to that point before planned meals became a thing. And it was just mental. Finally, I felt like I'd found my thing. And then I went on to back-to-back shows. So I actually went into another show with UK UP at Body Power, and that was the last year of Body Power. So I'm super happy that I did that, because it was almost like an achievement in itself to compete at Body Power. And I came 2nd at that show. And actually, that was a show I didn't need to do, because it was another qualifier with UK UP. But I said to Stephen, I want to compete at Body Power, and how hard can it be to peak back to back with 3 weeks in between? And I say this to a lot of competitors. I feel like the 3 weeks in between shows is the hardest slog. Like, it's tough. I thought, well, I'm at this dieted point, I'll be fine. And it was so hard. Like, I was just, I was whacked, but I did it and I came 2nd. And actually, on reflection, coming 2nd after winning a show 3 weeks later, first of all, the winner deserved the win. So that's always, a great spot to be in. But I also felt like it brought me down a peg of knowing that I have to fight to win every time I compete. Just because you've won one show, it doesn't mean you're going to win every show. And that was a big, big lesson in itself. Also, coming off the back of doing back-to-back peaks, which was new to me. I'd never done that before. So this was like my 4th season. Regaining control after a show. So after that first qualifier, I just went for a really, really sensible meal. It was like a chicken and veg. Then I did that 2nd show 3 weeks later, and it was at Body Power. And I remember I had So it was going to be a longer period of time before I competed again. So I ended up having a bit more of a flexible off-plan meal. And I also had a protein bar at Body Power, and it was so novel, but it was so delicious because I hadn't had anything like that. And just to be able to not track it, you know, that element of freedom was super, super cool. And that season I competed with NFM UK. I came second at that show and I got awarded my pro card with them. So by this point I'd had been awarded my pro card with UKUP and with NFM, and that year was it was crazy, you know, not placing, then placing sixth, and then suddenly winning and coming second at shows. It was like, how is this even happening? And my passion for the sport grew. And then I had a period of around 3 months of where we came up to maintenance and I'd qualified for the UKUP finals. And that was going to be in the October, and this was sort of May time. And I ended up doing the UKUP the British finals, and I won the finals, and it was unreal, just such an achievement. And I just felt so proud of myself to do that. I then a week later did a show called Rhinos, and I won that, and that qualified me to compete in Mexico and compete with WABA. And then I won Miss Universe 1 week after that in Mexico. Again, it's such an out of body experience. And, you know, I get people say to me now, you're Miss Universe. And I still feel like, yeah, you know, I'm just Sarah. But reflecting on my journey, it's something to be proud of, but it's not something I feel that I'm better than anyone else or I've achieved that. So that means that I'm always going to be successful as a bodybuilder in regards to placing or winning shows, because you just never know. And it's such a subjective sport that there's no guarantee you're going to win. There's no guarantee you're going to place, because you might not be what the judges are looking for. It might be that you're finding your way with different federations. And that's something moving forward as an athlete. It's trying to work out where I fit within different federations. So after that really successful season, I went in to compete as a WABA pro, because I got my pro card with them as well. And at Miss Universe, in the pro league, I went on to compete as a pro, and I came fourth for that as well, which was massive for me. And the winner looked phenomenal. You know, the muscle density, the muscle size, the way she presented herself was so aspirational for me. But when I then went back to compete as a pro, the look that they awarded was a smaller frame. I don't want to say skinny, but it wasn't what I'd seen awarded in my previous season. And Stephen and I had built an off season around the lady that won when I competed as a pro the first time, and fill out more. And to then not get awarded for that was really, really tough. And it left me feeling quite confused, and I didn't really know where to direct my energies. I then went back to UK BFF, which was a show, well, a federation that I competed with right at the start. And again, the look that I brought wasn't awarded. It wasn't what they were looking for. So when I came round to this year, I came away from being coached by Stephen. We still remain friends, and I'm really grateful for everything he did for me. But I went down the route of being coached by Tom, down the assisted route, and had some help with Joe, who's been on the pod before as well. Joe and Tom both have. And it's been a very different take on it for me. It's been a different prep. Like I say, it's been the hardest prep, but it's also been very different. Going down the assisted route was, you know, at first it felt very novel. It was very exciting for me, something different. And it also felt like I could step up and, I guess, take a different dimension to my journey. You know, bodybuilding, the assisted route is much more common now. Again, it's not something that anyone has to do. It's a personal choice, but it's something that I wanted to, you know, I've committed so much time to bodybuilding, and for me, this journey is about how I can improve my physique, and going down the assisted route for me felt like an opportunity to be able to do that. and turn it up a notch, as it were. So starting out with Tom, we did a little bit of an off season. So I think it was around 3 months. And then I started this prep. And that was, again, very different, a different coach, a different aspect. And Tom and I were friends first, but it was super, super cool. You know, it added to that novelty of going down the assisted route, that excitement. And I say novelty, but for me, what I mean by that is, you know, how can my physique look going down the assisted route, having a new coach, competing with different federations. It was almost like I was right back at the start, that excitement that you get when you first get into competing. And that was super, super cool. I think elements of that probably helped me get through this prep as well. You know, digging how I did, doing, you know, that severe deficit and really, really pushing myself back to back shows. It was a crazy prep, but it was also another opportunity to explore how hard I could push and where I could take my physique. And, you know, off the back of the 2 competitions that I did with as a WABA Pro and UKBFF, that was competing in COVID as well. And that was strange in itself. You know, I feel like the bodybuilding scene really changed. And during COVID, you know, you couldn't have any spectators. There was just the judges in masks and a cameraman. And it really reminded me of what I get from show day and what I get from competing. It was that stark reminder that for me, it's looking in the audience and seeing my mum, seeing my family and friends, and feeling their pride of how I've got to stage and what I've put in, them seeing that and them being there through the hard times. That really does give me a lot. And competing through COVID and then coming off the back of that this year where things have normalized, it's definitely changed the dynamics of bodybuilding and the shows. But I feel like it's, you know, slowly coming back, the community, the excitement for competing again and people bodybuilding, you know, having the expos back is super, super cool. And it reminds me of how much I really do thrive from the community aspect. And, you know, I've got so many good friends now that are from bodybuilding. There is an element of that being easier in regards to, you know, what each other does, you know, what it takes to compete, but also from people that bodybuild and hope to compete in the future. I've made some really good friends, and that is something I'm grateful for from this sport. You know, I've found people in my life that I wouldn't have found if I wasn't a bodybuilder. And again, you know, starting this podcast and sharing my knowledge, that is so important and special to me. You know, when I get messages from you guys, when you listen and you've taken enjoyment from the pod, I just love it. It's super, super cool, you know, and people sending in topic ideas and questions. I'm here for it all. You know, I love that opportunity to help anyone. And it was the reason why the podcast came, you know, being able to share that knowledge and hopefully help people, hopefully help people resonate. I remember when I used to listen to podcasts in preps and I'd think, I feel like I'm listened to. I feel like there's people out there that are doing what I'm doing, and I learned so much. And that's why, you know, that's the motivation to keep the podcast going and relate to people and offer that, I guess, that bridge of, you know, being able to learn from people in the industry, and where, like I say, I like to be open and honest. Hopefully people take a lot from that and know that you're not alone. And that's always going to be important to me. You know, this podcast is, I guess, like a condensement of what I've achieved, what I've learned, and being able to share that. And, you know, it's an opportunity, another opportunity that bodybuilding has given me. And competing this year in this hardest prep, it brought challenges in itself in my personal life. Another reason, you know, why I myself and a lot of you that do compete in a prep, you know, you come across things in your own personal life. And if you can continue during that prep, it's a massive thing as well. You know, what you've faced and being in a calorie deficit, doing your training, doing your food, all of the things that contribute. and facing personal challenges gives more substance. It gives you that realization that you can handle quite a lot. And this year has been a massive journey for me. I last July decided I was going to get divorced. So I was with Kieran for 12 years. That was all I knew for quite some time. Another reason why, that in that marriage, I was very unhappy for quite some time. Another reason why bodybuilding, I felt, saved me, because I was able to funnel all of this unhappiness into something, like I say, that felt positive. And it soon became an outlet for so much hurt. There was a lot of times when I would be walking my dogs and I'd think, what's the point in being here? And then I'd pop them home and go to the gym, and automatically I'd feel better. Or I would eat a really nourishing meal, I'd track my food, and all of these things that contribute to what you need to do. It gave me purpose and it gave me a reason to carry on. And it wasn't until I hit rock bottom, from this relationship, it got to the point where, again, through COVID, how that shaped a lot of where we're all currently at now and how it affected bodybuilding in itself. It made me realize that I wasn't the right person for Kieran and he wasn't the right person for me. And we were so different. And realizing that and having a couple of years, pretty much at home and with each other all the time, it exposed that it wasn't the right relationship. And it took a lot of strength to be able to break that up, to get divorced, to, sell my house, to let go of my dogs, because that became very, very nasty, that situation. And to be alone again in the world and start from scratch. And it took hitting that rock bottom to realize how bodybuilding, for me, it offered me strength, but I was able to save myself. Rather than maybe thinking that bodybuilding had saved me, it actually facilitated me realizing that I was able to save myself and take control of my own happiness. And that all came around the same sort of time as, becoming a coach and thinking about starting this podcast and feeling different about what bodybuilding could offer me. It enabled me to realize that I didn't need to be with someone else. I could be happy in myself. I could learn to love myself. And that took a bit of time. It took a bit of nourishment from people around me, friends, family. And there were so many periods during that time where I felt lost, but I also felt free. And knowing that I could step away from an unhappy marriage was the element of freedom that I needed. And knowing that I could be happy and that I deserved to be happy was massive for me. And for me, being a coach, it's something I'm so passionate about, sharing my knowledge, but also helping people achieve physique desires is unreal. Like, it makes me so happy. I was able to leave my job this year at the gym that I worked at and, completely delve into coaching full time. And it's so fulfilling. And building relationships with my clients, my clients that listen to this, or the clients that don't, I'm constantly trying to remind them, to empower them of how far they've come, the achievements they're making, the changes to their lifestyle that are going to ultimately help them feel better in themselves is a massive goal for me. Helping people realize what they're capable of is the best job ever. And through this transitional stage, becoming a coach, after hitting rock bottom and then leaving my job to do the coaching, to realize what really made me happy, to reassess my inner circle, to understand who my friends were, the people I wanted to have around, and that period of learning to love myself. I then met Matt, who is my boyfriend now, and I'm so happy and so grateful for this opportunity to be truly loved and be in love, rather than being with someone because I feel that I should, because it's the pressures of society are there contributing to me feeling like I should be married, should have children, all of these things that are natural progressions when you're with someone for quite some time. And this also contributed to this prep being the hardest prep, but also the most enjoyable. So that aspect of sharing this prep with Matt has just been unreal. And it's very hard to feel the pressures of prep when you feel really happy. And even when I was, I guess, in pain during this prep, like back pain from this injury I spoke about earlier from the car accident and triathlon aggravating that, doing a lot of posing, doing a lot of training, being in a severe deficit, it does bring about pain. But being happy and realizing why I'm bodybuilding, to evolve myself, to develop my physique, helps me to keep strong during a prep and achieve better condition than before, a better physique than before. And I guess sharing this part, getting the message out there, if you can be happy in yourself and take control of your life, it really does amplify what you can experience as a bodybuilder and what you can get from your sport. Even transitioning through the different phases as a bodybuilder, off-season, prep, enjoying that, embracing that, and understanding it is an extreme sport. When you diet and get down to stage condition, it's extreme. When you push up in an off season, it can also be extreme because you're pushing past comfort levels of where you'd ordinarily go if you weren't looking to gain muscle. And it is hard to transition through, but it is something you can do with lessons, with understanding, with talking to the right people. And also, that then crosses over into your inner circle, the people you spend most time with. Reassessing your inner circle, having the right energies around you, giving off your energies to the right people is going to have a instant comeback to you. If you're around people that you thrive from, that you enjoy being around, it's massive for your own energies and how much you can take from this sport. It really does change your experience. And don't be afraid to change how you approach clearing out your inner circle or changing your inner circle or coming away from certain people that you don't feel the right energies from. It's okay to do that. And it's important to know that you have the right people around you, that you want to empower them just as much as they empower you. And it then helps you, embrace all areas of your life. And like I said earlier, bodybuilding has facilitated me finding some of my best friends. And if you get that right inner circle, if you find people that you get that instant connection with, it's such a nourishing thing. And it's such a nice feeling to share this journey with them. Reflecting on your own achievements, reflecting on what you've done as a bodybuilder, whether it's the first time you've stepped on stage, whether you're going to step on stage in the future, having those people around you to share that with is such a nice feeling. And it makes bodybuilding so much more of a positive experience. Like I've said in this episode, there's a lot that can be taken from bodybuilding. There's also a lot of hard parts, grey areas, bits that aren't easy. But if you can find your why, understand why you're doing this journey, why you want to develop yourself, both physically and mentally, and by having the right people around you, and also remembering this sport is a choice, and no matter what judgment you face, no matter what opinions you come across, if you are doing this for you and you're evolving, that is what's important. And I really, really do hope you've enjoyed this episode. There was a lot I wanted to share, and I thought this would be a really nice opportunity to do that. And if anyone has got any questions, if you resonate with this, if you want to talk more about anything I've covered, I love the opportunity to do that. So as always, my Instagram handle is in the description below, but it's at @SarahParker_BB. I would love to hear from you, and I look forward to speaking to you all next week.